moodiness, caution and incaution in expression, patience and impatience, expressions of passion, romance, and melancholy. What are your beliefs? Do you have any ideas of value you'd like to share? These are all pressures, qualities, and questions that this cycle of the Human Design Weather for June 13th to 19th, 2026 bring. Hello, and welcome to the Human Design Weather or Not podcast with me, Margot Fraser. We move out of the tribal frequencies in this cycle and into a combination of individual and collective. This cycle begins on June 13th at 9:07 a.m., going until the 19th at 6:25 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Universal time coordinates, it starts June 13th at 3:07 p.m., going until June 19th at 12:25 p.m. Remember to convert that to your own time zone so you know when it starts and ends for you. We always start with the Sun-Earth activations because that's 70% of the conditioning field. The Sun has moved into Gate 12, the trait of caution and standstill in the throat center. This is part of the individual circuitry that can bring through mutation, through a pulse of knowing, in this case, of something mutative that may shift the way we relate to one another. Its keynote says the quality of restraint and the importance of meditation and inaction in confronting temptation. Now, the temptation here is to express your feelings, your moods. As a mutative trait that could bring something new, it has a built-in mechanic to be restrained until you're in the mood, which is why it has the name standstill. And patience is really needed because to be mutative, you have to express to the right people at the right time by following your strategy and authority. This trait brings individual expressions of feeling, knowing, moods, passion. It's pointed at that solar plexus emotional center. It can be romantic, it can be brooding, it can be volatile, beautiful, ecstatic. It can drop into melancholy, that there's no one to listen to what you have to say. It has the potential to be incredibly articulate. It's part of the only social channel of the individual circuitry. It's also one of the three gates of aloneness, where you wait until the proper mood for the moment to release the awareness of your emotional spirit and then withdraw again. This is the voice of I try or not. I know I can try if I'm in the mood. I know I can be social. I'm just not in the mood right now. I know I can be alone. I'm just not in the mood to be alone right now. Now, if the patience and restraint aren't there, the polarity can play out, and it's the voice of incaution. And that incaution can be volatile, provoking, angry, and agitating. It could come out as being very aggressive with what you or those around you are not in the mood for. I'm not in the mood for any of your shenanigans. This trait can also be overly cautious, never speaking out the mutative knowing. Gate 12 is being grounded by the Earth's position, which is in Gate 11, the trait of ideas and peace in the Ajna Center. That's the seat of our mind, our mental processes, and mental awareness. Its keynote says a harmonic condition in the individual or society that permits assessment before renewed action. Ideas need to be considered and assessed. They bring different perspectives. This is part of the collective abstract experiential circuitry that's all about making sense of the past, and in this trait, gaining ideas from the realizations of the mental making sense process that can be eventually shared. This is the place where belief systems are developed as the ideas become beliefs. Remember that this is not logic. It's not based in fact, but people can be incredibly fervent about their beliefs. We've all seen and heard that. The thing is about your ideas is that they're mostly not for you to do anything about. They're to be expressed when correct for you and may stimulate others. You could really make yourself miserable and feel incapable if you're trying to fulfill on all of the ideas that your mind has. You could get some really great ideas that are inspiring to others this cycle, perhaps shifting someone else into action. And you might hear some stimulating ideas from others that you may act on according to your own strategy and authority, of course. This is also a trait that can help educate the uneducated. Line 4 of this trait is called the teacher. It's a trait that can bring the ability to really paint a picture for someone so that they can understand something that they may have never experienced themselves. The assessment piece in the keynote is also about determining if the idea is of value or not. Is the idea really something that contributes to the collective, or is it completely impractical? We could see people blurting out ideas that aren't fully formed and totally impractical this cycle, but they might really be trying to convince you to believe in them. Or perhaps you'll be the one trying to do the convincing. Now, when we look at these two traits together, mutative ideas that shift relationships for better or worse may be expressed. An articulate expression may open one's mind to new ideas, or an inarticulate expression or not expressing one's knowings when it's correct could close minds or fail to shift the prevailing belief system. Now, I want to mention that the Earth's position, gate 11, is in a channel for this full cycle, and that's going to mean that the channel themes will dominate. But let's look at the nodes first, because that really sets the context, and it brings the homogenized perspective and direction that we'll see playing out in the world. And then the Sun, Earth, and all the other planetary traits operate within that context. We have the North Node sitting in gate 55, the individual trait of abundance and spirit in the emotional center, the solar plexus center. It brings a general context that's about the individual spirit. It brings a moody, glass half full, glass half empty perspective, as well as passion and romance, or their polarity. So you can tell from that it's actually in the same stream as our Sun's position, gate 12. Now, gate 55 has the highest highs and the lowest lows of all gates in the emotional center, so we're likely to see more emotional volatility in the world with this being present. Since individual traits can drop into melancholy, there's the potential for seeing and feeling the melancholy in the world. The South Node sitting in gate 59, the tribal trait of sexuality in the sacral center. It's part of the channel of mating, and it's going to bring a general context where one-on-one relationships are highlighted, whether intimate, friendships, or business partnerships. It can also bring an environment where literal fertility issues are more present, or where there could be creative fertility, or not. The nodes start the cycle in line 3, and that brings a general environment of trial and error, bonds made and broken, adaptation, and a more material perspective. For gate 55, line 3 is called innocence. This is where if you just follow your moods, you find out there can still be failure. This is trial and error. As long as you learn from it and move on, nothing's going to be lost. If a superior gets caught up in your individual initiative in the up of the wave and makes commitments based on that, and then those commitments aren't fulfilled once one goes down in the wave, it's the superior here that ends up getting punished. For gate 59, line 3 is called openness. This is going to bring an environment where people are open to coming into a bond, a partnership with another. Again, whether that's intimate or at a business level. This is where we can really see people dissolving into the relationship and defining themselves in that union and being empowered through that. In the polarity, when the ego gets involved, the openness can bring being empowered through promiscuity. So it's an environment of being very open to one another for a one-on-one relationship. Now, something to watch for while this is present is that if you're in a long-term relationship with someone that you're around pretty much 24/7 and that works well, while this frequency is present, there may be more friction there, more irritation, because the trial and error and bonds made and broken aspect of this third line may bring this wanting to have some time apart to break the bond. Doesn't have to be permanent, but just not to be joined at the hip 24/7. So there could be this picking of fights to try and create some distance there. It's just the transit field playing out. Now, on June 17th at 12:48 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, the nodes will be moving into line 2 with its theme of projecting out and its more antisocial nature that comes with this. It doesn't mean because the trait is projected out that the individual can actually fulfill on it. For gate 55, line 2 is called distrust, and it has a developmental theme that says abundance hampered by slander or gossip. So what's being projected out here is the mood, whether at the glass half full end or the glass half empty end. So we're going to have everyone who gets impacted by this trait, and that's everyone who has the emotional center defined in their chart or who gets it defined through an electromagnetic connection with a transit field gate, which will happen if you've got gate 22, gate 6, gate 39, or gate 30 in your design. Its exaltation says emotional stability and the strength of the spirit is dependent on being trusted by others. The detriment says the emotional drive to insist on trustworthiness that does not guarantee its acceptance by others or benefits the spirit. Where you're at in your mood is where you're at. But the up and down of it, the fickleness of it, can create distrust. You're projecting out the mood, and line 2 doesn't really recognize that it's doing it. And others, specific others, can sense that. So your ability to relate to others can have them accept that you're at where you're at. But if you try to convince others that they can, you can trust where I'm at, you can trust the mood I'm in, that just creates deeper distrust. Now, for gate 59, line 2 is called shyness. It has a developmental theme that says self-impose barriers. The exaltation says a preferred and natural separateness that protects against the inevitable instability engendered by union, the restriction of the sex drive to maintain separateness. Yeah, when you come into a relationship with others, there's instability there, right? That's part of it. In the detriment, it says a calculated shyness rooted in deep psychological barriers that even in dynamic individuals will always restrict interaction. Infertility rooted psychologically or biologically that conditions the drive for separateness. Now, second lines are very selective and are in their own process, which is a little tricky when this is part of the channel of mating and intimacy. This is a line that doesn't really know how to deal with the others, right? It's an internalized line. Lines 1, 2, 3 are always more internalized. So there's this natural putting up of barriers, and we call that shyness. That's how we relate to it. That's going to need then boldness of another to come in to break down those barriers. In the detriment, this is intensified, and only very, very specific persons will have the consistency of boldness and that exact genetic attraction for intimacy to work. So remember that this is an expression of the reproductive genes. So where we had the third line openness to intimacy, even to the point of promiscuity with the third line, now when this comes in, we go to a natural guardedness and putting up barriers that's going to be conditioning our environment, and it's going to make it more difficult, likely, to establish those one-on-one relationships at whatever level that is. Okay, so that sets our context that we're likely to see playing out around us. And we can't separate ourselves from our environment, so we're going to feel it, or it may play out through us as well. Let's move into our short to long-term channels now. A reminder that when the transit field creates a channel, everyone that doesn't already have it in their chart is receiving activation of the related traits and qualities. So there's a big impact that way. All right, for the full cycle, we have the Earth's positioning in the trait of ideas connecting with its electromagnetic gate 56 in the throat center. Now, Jupiter has moved into gate 56, the trait of stimulation. That happened really close to the end of last cycle, and it's part of that mental, collective, abstract process where the ideas that have come from The realizations that we talked about, as I described gate 11 earlier, can be expressed in that gate 56 through stimulating stories. Jupiter's sitting in line 1 called quality. And quality is really encapsulated by the exaltation that says expression of practical ideas that have value. So the ultimate goal of the abstract circuitry is to support humanity's evolution, so we don't have to start from scratch each time that we go through a cycle. In the detriment, the ego gets involved and says the drive to stimulate that will express any idea, no matter how trivial. So expect to hear a lot of trivia coming out in this particular cycle. On June 17th at 4:23 a.m., Jupiter's going to move into line 2 called linkage. So once that happens, we have again that selectivity of the second line. Here the exaltation says a genius for stimulating expression that will take time to mature and will need others to recognize it. The second line, again, is always projecting out and needs someone to call it out. In the detriment, it says a gift for communicating, but not enough depth. So there hasn't been that maturing time, and given that this is a transit, we're more likely to hear this detriment. Lots of talk and not enough depth. Together, these create the channel of curiosity, a design of a seeker. It's going to bring the pressure to share your ideas in stimulating ways, typically through storytelling. You might find yourself looking for feedback about what you've shared as well, right? As the trait of stimulation, gate 56 in the throat center, it wants to know, it's just built into it, that it has had some kind of impact on the others. Now, watch that you're not blurting things out without being invited to it, or it's likely to be to the wrong people at the wrong time and not really be heard in the way that you intended. While the ideas may be grounded with the Earth activating that gate of ideas, Jupiter's expansion of the expression in line 2 is likely to lead to a lot of storytelling that isn't of value. It could still be fun to hear these stories, or maybe it's going to be irritating. You can find yourself that you have ideas from what you've made sense of, but with that second line for gate 56, have difficulty expressing those with the level of depth that you'd like. Just be patient. It will all come together over time. Now, moving on to our next channel, we had the channel of acceptance, a design of an organizational being from May 22nd to June 12th. And it's back. It's back, first of all, for a little taster through the transit of the moon, which will be moving into gate 62, the trait of details in the throat center, and connecting with Neptune's position, gate 17, the trait of opinions in the ajna center. That's going to be from June 16th at 3:08 p.m. to June 17th at 12:12 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. UTC, it'll come in June 16th at 9:08 p.m. until the 17th at 6:12 a.m. Then about 6 hours later, Mercury's going to move into gate 62. Now, usually Mercury only stays in a gate for about 3 to 4 days. But here, right as it clicks through the lines up to line 6, it's then going to go into retrograde. So we have this abnormally long period for Mercury being in a single gate. And here it's going to be connecting with Neptune. That's going to start on June 17th at 6 a.m., going until July 12th at 5:39 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. UTC, it'll come in on June 17th at 12 p.m., going until July 12th at 11:39 p.m. Gate 17 that Neptune is activating is the trait of opinions in the Ajna center. It's correlated biologically to the right eye, and it really takes in the patterns in the now. Gate 17 is really taking all those patterns that it's taken in and processing those to come up with your opinions, your theories about things, how you think things work. So gate 17 is going to bring the pressure for that to go through this logical thinking and conceptualization process. It's sitting in line 1 called openness. It brings the possibility to be open to many patterns and having many opinions in all sorts of areas, or like an art critic, only having opinions when it comes to a certain area of interest that you really enjoy, but having no opinion in any other area. Now, Neptune has that veiling quality. So that processing could be more difficult. It can be more difficult to really grasp the patterns that are there. Gate 62, the trait of detail in the throat center, brings all the facts and details together to express to others in a way that they can understand. So once Mercury moves into this gate, we have a planet that's all about communicating in a throat gate. So we have yet another channel that's going to bring a lot of pressure to express yourself. This is the voice of I think or I don't think. The logical channel of acceptance, this design of an organizational being, is going to bring that pressure to express your opinions, your theories, with all the details and facts. It's a great frequency to have present when you've got to do organizing of people and things. And with Mercury activating gate 62, there may be a lot of talking about getting things organized or how things should be organized or the lack of organization. It's going to add to the busy mind that the channel of curiosity is already bringing, especially if you don't have a defined ajna in your design. So if you've got that open ajna center, don't be surprised if you're finding that you're really kind of up in your head a lot. And there can also be here anxiety of having your opinions challenged. Now, just watch that this mental activity doesn't have you so up in your head that it pulls you away from your strategy and decision-making authority. That's the one thing to really be cautious of in this cycle, because there's going to be a lot going on up here. All right, so let's look at the definition now, the consistent themes present in this cycle through the short to long-term channels and the gate activations in the related centers. I'll leave out the moon and the interplanet transits unless they're in a channel or present for most or all of the cycle. This definition is what everyone in the world is going to be directly conditioned by through the transit field. So it's going to run those that are not aware. This is what we'll see play out in the world. However, with your awareness, you'll have the potential to learn from these frequencies and use them to your advantage when it's correct for you. It's all about the mental processes this cycle, as you could probably guess from what we've talked about already. For the full cycle, we've got that channel of curiosity. It's going to be the only channel present from July 12th at 9:07 a.m. when we start the cycle until June 17th at 4:24 Mountain Daylight Time or 10:24 a.m. UTC. It's activating the ajna and the throat centers. So that means any other transit field gates in those centers are going to be consistently and reliably activated as well. So in the ajna center, it's going to bring in gate 17, the trait of opinions in the ajna center in line 1, openness, as we already discussed. And in the throat center, it's going to bring in our sun's position, gate 12, the trait of caution and incaution, Uranus in gate 20, the trait of the now, and we'll also have Mars clicking through the lines of gate 23, the individual trait of assimilation through this cycle. Gate 20 is being activated by Uranus, and it's starting the cycle in line 3 called self-awareness. It could bring revolutionary self-awareness through the trial and error process where you can be self-conscious of yourself and the world around you and learn from that. Or if you don't like what you see from that self-awareness, there could be this being so overly self-conscious that you can't really function. There can also be a tendency with this to this kind of what's wrong with me thinking. If rejected in that third line, bonds made and broken theme that plays out here. What's ideal here is just being aware that your individuality isn't for everyone, and that's okay. If you get into the what's wrong with me side, Uranus could really sidetrack you. On June 16th at 3:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, 9:30 a.m. UTC, Uranus is going to move into line 4 called application. It's got a developmental theme that says recognition and awareness that can only be transformed into action in cooperation with those who have the ability to act upon the understanding. Now, line 4 can see the other end of its channels. And remember that gate 20 connects to the 10 in the G center, the 34 in the sacral center, and the 57 in the splenic center. As a throat gate, it can express its individual knowing in the now. In its exaltation, it's the teacher whose students can grasp and understand that knowing and use it to transcend the teacher. In the detriment, the students they can't grasp that knowing that's expressed, and so it just remains theoretical. Putting the themes of this definition together, the conditioning pressure could have you expressing your moods and passions through stories that incorporate your ideas, opinions, and what you know through your self-consciousness and what you've assimilated. If you're not invited and not following your strategy and authority on the timing of your expression, there's going to be anger, frustration, bitterness, and disappointment at not being heard or understand, and then not really making a difference. You're likely to hear a lot of what I call verbal diarrhea, right? Where people are just incautiously blurting out their stories with fuzzy logic and weird explanations that's difficult, if not downright impossible, to make sense of. You could hear some nuggets that really have value, but you might have to sift through a lot of gibberish to get to those. And for most of the time this definition is present, we do have an environment, a context that's about openness and innocence in moodiness. Then on June 17th at 4:24 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, 10:24 a.m. UTC until the end of the cycle, we then have that second mental channel coming in, that logical channel of acceptance, a design of an organizational being. So 2 of the 3 channels now from the ajna to the throat center. We're taking that pressure to express yourself up another notch here. So now there could be cautiously expressing your moods and passions through stimulating stories that are very organized and detailed, incorporating what you know in the now and have assimilated that you hope others can apply and will be of value. If you're not invited and not following your strategy and authority on the timing of your expression, there's going to be anger, frustration, bitterness, disappointment again at not being heard or understand and not really expressing anything of value. What you're most likely to hear are stories that are fuzzy in logic and disorganized with weird so-called facts and obscure details that are difficult to understand and make sense of, and these could be expressed in a volatile way that throws caution to the wind. There's going to be a lot of pressure to just blurt out whatever one's thinking, for better or worse. I mean, look at all those throat gates that are activated there. If you have an undefined throat, that pressure is going to be amplified. So be aware of that and do your best to bring some humor to it if something just does pop out. While this definition is present, we'll have shifted into the second nodes for the homogenized environment and context that will be present that brings projection and a more antisocial vibe. So this is kind of an interesting combination here. So with gate 55 in the emotional center in the same stream as the sun's position, gate 12, it could bring in a greater sense of distrust in what's said and the barriers of shyness of gate 59, either feeling like one is talking to a wall, that might come out, or being overly expressive to try and break down those barriers to a more intimate interaction. So we have this very strong throat activation that wants to express, and yet this environment that's full of distrust and shyness. So it's a kind of interesting polarities that are going to be playing out here. And it could lead to a sense of no one's listening to me. All right, we've got a couple of long-term transits in undefined centers we haven't talked about, and whether they have a personal impact on you is going to depend on your own design. What remains is gate 21, the trait of the hunter, huntress, and control in the ego center that's being activated by Saturn. That's our first gate that's left over here. It's starting the cycle in line 4 called strategy, where understanding what needs to be controlled strategically to be able to manifest the material needs of the tribe is present. However, that's only in the field for about 11 hours. And then on January 13th at 8:06 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, the 14th at 2:06 a.m. UTC, Saturn's going to move into line 5 called objectivity. It has a developmental theme that says the use of force must be based on impartiality and not emotionally motivated. The exaltation says a principled and legal character that it ensures objectivity. The balanced ego, whose willpower is applied objectively. So this trait again is about managing resources and people so that the tribe can be materially successful. Over time, one can learn to apply that willpower to control things in an objective way. Now, fortunately, the detriment for this line isn't active in the world. It's all about being subjective instead of objective. All right. We also have the trait of decrease and contraction in the root center, which is part of that abstract experiential circuitry. It's in line 4 called correction, where you can use this drive to adapt and correct along the way to fulfilling an experience, or you can use it to maintain harmonious relationships at the expense of adapting. It's just going to result in a different kind of journey through the experience. We've already talked about the nodal gates 55, the trait of spirit with its moodiness, and gate 59, the trait of sexuality that set the context, and that they'll bring the trial and error environment until the 17th, and then the line 2 projection, antisocial type environment to the end of the cycle. Okay, just a quick review of the channels that are being created by the transits of the moon. Because they're only present for 10 or 11 hours, give or take, they don't have a big impact on the homogenized conditioning field that we've talked about, but they could have a personal impact on you. The first one's coming in June 14th at 9:52 a.m., going until 6:40 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. UTC coming in on the 14th at 3:52 p.m., going until the 15th at 12:40 a.m. We have the 4521 tribal channel of the money line, connecting the ego center to the throat. This is the design of a materialist and will bring pressure to manage and acquire the resources that you need. Next up, we have coming in June 15th at 9:13 p.m., going until the 16th at 6:08 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. UTC coming in on the 16th at 3:13 a.m., going until 12:08 p.m. We have the 3955 individual channel of emoting, connecting the root center to the emotional solar plexus center. This is a design of moodiness with its pressure to fill your cup and find those who can help you to do so. Or you could drop into the glass half empty side where it feels like there's nothing to be passionate about. Next and finally, we have coming in on June 18th at 3:59 a.m., going until 1:28 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. UTC coming in June 18th at 9:59 a.m., going until 7:28 p.m. Here we have the 731 collective logic channel of the alpha, connecting the G center to the throat center. This is the design of leadership for good or bad, and brings the pressure to lead or guide others from the patterns that you see could help them to move forward. Well, that brings us to the end of the cosmic weather for this cycle. If you want to run your own chart, you can go to jovianarchive.com. If you're new to human design and you just want to understand the basics of the body graph at a high level, what's the black and the red about, the different geometric shapes and so on, a little bit of background on the human design system, feel free to grab my free Human Design Basics mini course. It's at margotgfraser.com/human-design. Okay, well, have a great cycle. Be kind to one another, and may you know, love, and live the magic of your true nature. Until next time, bye for now.